Hi and welcome. I'm Midnight Truth, and it's so nice to have you here tonight, wherever you are right now, whether you're in bed, lying on the couch, or just looking for a quiet moment. I want you to know this time is for you. Take a deep breath in, and as you breathe out, feel the weight of the day start to fade. Let your mind settle, let your body relax, and let yourself simply be. There's no rush, no pressure, just this calm, quiet moment. If you'd like, you can close your eyes and imagine yourself in a peaceful place. Maybe it's a cozy room with soft, warm lighting. Or maybe it's under a starry sky, with a gentle breeze brushing against you. Wherever you feel safe and calm, let yourself drift there. I know many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time is it there? Tonight's story is gentle and soothing, perfect to carry you into a deep, restful sleep. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin. I never believed in ghosts. Not really. Sure, I liked a good horror story now and then, but I always figured those things were just stories. Something to send a little chill down your spine, but nothing real. That was before I moved into the house. It wasn't much to look at. An old Victorian-style home at the end of a quiet street, its paint peeling from years of neglect. The porch sagged slightly in the middle, and the windows, dark and empty, reminded me of watching eyes. But it was cheap, dirt cheap, and after my divorce, cheap was all I could afford. The landlord was an older man, thin and pale, his hand shaking slightly as he handed me the keys. "Place has been empty a while," he said, eyes darting to the house and back to me. "Some folks say it's got history, but you don't strike me as the superstitious type." I wasn't. And honestly, I didn't care about some silly rumors. I was just grateful to have a fresh start. The first few days were uneventful. The place smelled a little musty, and the floorboards creaked under my feet. But that was to be expected in a house this old. At night, I'd hear the wind moan through the cracks in the walls, the occasional tap, tap, tap of tree branches against the window. Normal house noises. Then on my third night, I met Mrs. Gibson, the old woman who lived next door. She was sitting on her porch as I pulled into the driveway, her eyes fixed on my house. I gave her a polite nod, but she didn't return it. Instead, she stood slowly and shuffled toward me. "You shouldn't be here," she said in a voice like dry leaves. I forced a smile. "Why's that?" She hesitated, glancing at the house. No one stays long. Last man ran out in the middle of the night, screaming about, things watching him from the dark. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Things? Mrs. Gibson shook her head. "No one knows what he saw, but I hear things, too. Late at night. Footsteps. Whispers." Her milky eyes fixed on me. "Be careful." I laughed it off, but later that night, as I lay in bed, her words crept back into my mind. Then I heard it, a single creak from the hallway. My breath caught in my throat. Probably just the house settling, I told myself. I rolled over, pulling the blanket tighter around me. Another creak, closer this time. I held my breath. The old wooden floors groaned under what sounded like the weight of slow, deliberate footsteps. My heart pounded. Was someone in the house? I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling. I turned on the flashlight, aiming it at the open bedroom door. The hallway beyond was empty. I waited, listening. Nothing. No more creaks. No footsteps. Just silence. Maybe Mrs. Gibson's stories had gotten to me. I shook my head and laughed quietly at myself. I was being ridiculous, but as I turned off the flashlight and settled back into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Something was there, watching, waiting, asterisk, asterisk, and this was just the beginning. I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My body was heavy, my head thick with exhaustion. The memories of the night before clung to me like cobwebs. Creaking floorboards, that awful feeling of being watched. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it had just been my imagination, mixed with a little paranoia from what Mrs. Gibson had said. That old woman had probably told the same story to every new tenant, and I refused to let it get into my head. The house was just old. That was all. I spent the morning unpacking, trying to settle into some kind of routine. The more I moved around, the more I noticed little things about the house. The air always felt slightly cold, no matter how much I adjusted the thermostat. Certain floorboards were oddly warm under my feet, while others were freezing. There was a faint smell of something damp that seemed stronger in the upstairs hallway, like old wood that had been left to rot. I also noticed something else. Asterisk, asterisk, a door I hadn't seen before, asterisk, asterisk. It was in the hallway near the staircase, partially hidden behind an old bookcase that had been left by the previous owner. I must have walked past it a dozen times without noticing. The handle was rusted, and when I tried to turn it, it wouldn't budge. Locked. I made a mental note to find the key later. By late afternoon, I decided to introduce myself to Mrs. Gibson properly. I figured she'd lived here long enough to know more about the house's history, and despite her cryptic warnings, she didn't seem unfriendly, just cautious. She answered the door before I even knocked. "You're still here," she said, peering at me through the crack. I forced a chuckle. "Yeah, I tend to stick around longer than most people." She didn't smile. Instead, she stepped onto her porch, pulling the door shut behind her like she didn't want our conversation to happen inside her house. "Did you hear anything last night?" she asked. The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" She pursed her lips. "I heard something. Footsteps. Heavy ones. Moving around in your house after midnight." A cold shiver ran through me. "You must have heard me walking around," I said quickly. "I probably got up to get some water, or—" Mrs. Gibson shook her head. "No, I know what footsteps sound like. And these—" She hesitated, her eyes clouded. "These were not yours." I didn't know what to say to that. After a long silence, she sighed. "The man who lived there before you, he was a strong one, bigger than you, thought he could handle it." I felt my stomach tighten. "Handle what?" She glanced toward the house and lowered her voice. "You don't see it yet, but you will. And when you do, it'll be too late." That was the end of our conversation. She turned and went back inside, leaving me standing there with more questions than answers. That night, I went to bed earlier than usual. The exhaustion from barely sleeping the night before had finally caught up to me. But just as I was drifting off, creak, my eyes snapped open. The sound came from the hallway. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay still, listening. Then came another noise, a faint, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the wooden floor. My mouth went dry. I turned my head slowly toward the open doorway. Nothing. The hallway was empty. I sat up, my pulse hammering in my ears. I told myself to get up, to check, but my body wouldn't move. Some deep, instinctual part of me was screaming, "Asterisk, asterisk, don't look, asterisk, asterisk." A soft breath of cold air brushed against my cheek. I gasped and flipped on the lamp beside my bed. Light flooded the room, chasing away the shadows. The cold vanished. I was alone, but as I sat there, heart racing, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. The door in the hallway, the one I had found earlier, asterisk, asterisk, was slightly open, asterisk, asterisk, and I was sure, absolutely sure, that it had been locked. I didn't sleep after that. I sat upright in bed, staring at the hallway where the door had been left ajar. The room was silent, but I could still feel something in the air, something thick and wrong. I wanted to believe I had left the door like that by mistake, but deep down, I knew better. It had been locked. I forced myself to get up. My legs felt unsteady as I stepped toward the hallway. The wooden floor was ice cold under my bare feet. I reached the door and hesitated, my fingers hovering over the edge. A musty, damp smell drifted from the darkness inside. Holding my breath, I pushed the door open wider. Inside was a staircase, leading down into absolute blackness. A basement. I hadn't even known the house had one. The listing never mentioned it. And I had never seen a door leading downstairs before today. I fumbled for a light switch, but there was nothing on the wall. My phone's flashlight barely cut through the darkness, revealing wooden steps covered in a thick layer of dust. No footprints. It didn't make sense. If the door had been opened, something had to have come out, or gone in. A wave of nausea twisted in my stomach. I wasn't going down there. Not now. Maybe not ever. I shut the door and pushed the bookcase back in front of it, hands shaking. It wasn't a perfect barricade, but it was enough to make me feel like I had done something, like I had taken control. Still, the house didn't feel the same anymore. It was like I had disturbed something. The next day, I tried to go about my routine like nothing had happened. I made coffee, checked my emails, even turned on the TV to fill the silence. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It wasn't just in my head. I would catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, shadows shifting in the reflection of the windows, dark shapes in places they shouldn't be. And the noises, it started with soft creaks in the floorboards, subtle things that could be blamed on the house settling. But by afternoon, I heard something else, a faint tapping sound. I muted the TV listening. Tap, 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 asterisk, asterisk. It was coming from the hallway, from behind the bookcase. I stood frozen, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't possible. I had blocked that door. No one could be down there. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, asterisk, asterisk, it stopped, asterisk, asterisk. I didn't move for a long time. Eventually, I forced myself to step forward, heart hammering. I reached out, my fingers gripping the edge of the bookcase. I took a deep breath. A loud bang slammed against the door from the other side. I stumbled backward, my vision swimming. Something was down there, and it knew I was here. I barely left my room that night. The noises didn't stop. Pacing, tapping, scraping, asterisk, asterisk, the sounds of something moving just beyond the barrier I had put up. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a fitful sleep. But when I woke up in the middle of the night, I wasn't alone. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. The room was cold. My breath came out in a thin mist. The darkness around me felt thick, pressing against my skin like unseen hands. And then a deep, slow creak of weight shifting at the foot of my bed. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Something was sitting there, watching me. I squeezed my eyes shut, every instinct in my body screaming at me not to look. The air felt heavy, thick with something unnatural. Then, asterisk, asterisk, whispers, asterisk, asterisk. Low, almost inaudible, right next to my ear. A single word, spoken in a voice that didn't belong to this world. Asterisk, stay. Asterisk. I bolted upright, my hand fumbling for the lamp. Light flooded the room. Nothing was there, but the blanket at the foot of my bed was sunken in, as if something heavy had been sitting there only moments ago. And on the floor, footprints, leading from the bookcase to my bed, and then vanishing. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in bed, gripping the blanket so tightly my knuckles ached. My heart was still hammering against my ribs, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The footprints, they were right there, clear as day. Asterisk, asterisk leading to my bed, but not away from it, asterisk, asterisk. I kept telling myself I was imagining things, that it was sleep deprivation, stress, or some weird trick of the light. But deep down, I knew better. Something had been in my room, and it was still here. I forced myself to move, to do something. The silence was suffocating, and every second I spent sitting in that bed felt like an invitation for whatever had whispered to me to come closer. I swung my legs over the side of the bed. The air was colder down here, thick and unmoving. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, switching on the flashlight. The bright beam cut through the dark, landing on the footprints. They were deep, heavy, as if something large had stood there. I followed the trail with my light, my stomach tightening with every step. They stopped at my bedside, then just vanished. Like whatever had been here had just disappeared. A chill crawled up my spine. I forced myself to breathe, to push down the rising panic. I had to be rational about this. Maybe the footprints were mine. Maybe I had stepped in something, even though I couldn't remember doing so. Maybe the creaks and whispers were just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe, but I wasn't convinced. I needed answers. The next morning, I didn't even bother with coffee. I left the house as soon as the sun came up, walking straight to Mrs. Gibson's house. She answered almost immediately, as if she had been expecting me. "You heard it, didn't you?" she said, her voice quiet. I didn't even bother pretending anymore. Something's wrong with that house. She exhaled slowly, then stepped outside, closing the door behind her like she didn't even want to speak about it inside. "There's a reason no one stays there long," she said, watching me closely. "I've seen plenty of folks move in just like you. Strong ones, too. But one by one, they all left. Some lasted months. Some barely lasted a week." I swallowed. What happened to them? She hesitated. "The last man, Jeremy, I think his name was, he was the only one who stuck around longer than most. A year, maybe more. Said the noises didn't bother him, that he didn't believe in ghosts." Her gaze darkened. "But then one night, he ran out of there. No shoes, no coat. Just took off down the street, screaming his damn head off. By the time anyone found him, he was in some kind of shock. I felt my stomach drop. What did he say?" Mrs. Gibson's expression tightened. Nothing that made sense. Kept babbling about the door and how he let it out. Wouldn't go back in the house. Moved away the next morning. I glanced back at my house, at the window of my bedroom. The curtains barely moved, but for a second, asterisk, asterisk, just a second, asterisk, asterisk, I thought I saw something shift behind the glass. Something watching. I turned back to Mrs. Gibson, my voice hoarse, who lived there before him. She hesitated. Then finally she said, "The man who built that house wasn't right in the head." I tensed. "What do you mean?" Her gaze flickered to the house again. "His name was Albert Finch. He built that place himself back in the 1940s. Lived there alone for years. People in town knew to stay away from him. He was obsessed with things. Dark things. People whispered about rituals, strange noises coming from the house at all hours. Some said he was trying to open a door to another world. Others said he already had. A cold, heavy weight settled in my chest. What happened to him? I asked. Mrs. Gibson didn't blink. He vanished. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. One day he just disappeared, she continued. No body, no sign of where he went. It was like he walked into that house and never came back out. The police searched every inch of that place, but the only thing they found was his journal. A slow, creeping dread spread through my veins. A journal. I remembered the basement, the door I had found, the heavy, dragging noises that had started after I opened it. Mrs. Gibson lowered her voice. I don't know where that journal is now, but if I were you, I wouldn't go looking for it. But I already knew it was too late for that. I had found the door, and something on the other side knew. That night, I sat in the living room, every light in the house turned on. I kept my back against the couch, watching the hallway where the bookcase stood. I wasn't going to sleep, not after everything I had learned, but as the hours dragged on, exhaustion pulled at me. My eyelids grew heavier. My head drooped forward. Then, bang, my eyes snapped open. The sound had come from the hallway, from behind the bookcase. I stood up slowly, my entire body tense. The air was wrong, thick, and charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. Then, scratch, a slow, deliberate sound, something clawing at the wood. I took a step back, my breath coming in short gasps. Scratch, 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 asterisk, asterisk. My stomach twisted. It was getting louder. Then the bookcase lurched forward. I choked on a scream. The whole thing shuddered, as if something on the other side was pushing it. I ran. I didn't think. I just ran. I grabbed my keys, threw open the front door, and stumbled outside, gasping for air. My pulse was a wild, frantic thing in my chest. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at the house, at the dimly lit windows. Nothing moved, no sound, but as I watched, the hallway light flicked off. Someone, asterisk, asterisk, something asterisk, asterisk, had just turned it off, and I wasn't inside anymore. I didn't go back inside that night. I couldn't. Instead, I sat on the porch, gripping my keys so tightly they left indentations in my palm. My breath came in shallow gasps, my heart hammering in my chest. The house stood in front of me, quiet now, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. Something had been in there with me. And worse, asterisk, asterisk, it knew I had seen it, asterisk, asterisk. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the windows, waiting for something to move behind the glass. Maybe an hour, maybe two, but at some point, exhaustion took over, and against all better judgment, I drifted into an uneasy, dreamless sleep. I woke to the sound of birds chirping. Morning. The house looked different in daylight. Asterisk, asterisk, less sinister, less alive. Asterisk, asterisk, the windows were just windows. The walls just walls. The bookcase in the hallway had been pushed forward, but it wasn't as dramatic as it had seemed in the dark. It was still standing, only slightly tilted, as if it had been bumped or pulled by an uneven floor. I tried to convince myself that's all it was, but deep down I knew better. I had two choices, run or fight. Leaving felt like the smart option, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't. Not yet, because if I ran now, I would never know the truth, and I needed to know. I needed to find that journal. I spent the morning tearing the house apart. I checked every drawer, every cabinet, every closet. Nothing. If Albert Finch's journal was still in this house, it was hidden well. That left only one place, the basement. I stood at the top of the stairs, staring down into the darkness. The air felt colder here, heavier. My stomach twisted with unease. The dragging noises had started after I opened that door. What if something had been waiting for it to open? I shook the thought away and forced myself to move. I flicked the light switch. A single, dim bulb buzzed to life, casting long, trembling shadows against the stone walls. I descended slowly, my footsteps echoing in the tight space. The basement smelled of damp earth and something else, something faintly metallic. The door was still there, the one I had found on my first night. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the latch. Then, before I could lose my nerve, I opened it. Inside was nothing but darkness. I lifted my phone and turned on the flashlight. Dust swirled in the beam, the air thick and stagnant. And then, in the farthest corner, asterisk, asterisk, a small wooden chest, asterisk, asterisk. I swallowed hard. My hands were shaking as I stepped forward. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt, like something unseen was pressing down on me. The chest was old, very old. The wood was warped with age. The metal hinges rusted and fragile. My fingers trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside, beneath a thick layer of dust, was a leather-bound journal. Albert Finch's journal. I exhaled sharply, barely able to believe it. My hands trembled as I picked it up, running my fingers over the brittle cover. The edges were scorched, as if someone had tried to burn it but failed. I turned to the first page. The handwriting was erratic, frantic, and the first line made my blood run cold. Underscore, I have made a mistake. Underscore, asterisk, asterisk. The journal was filled with ramblings, rituals, and warnings. Albert Finch had been obsessed with something he called the door. He had spent years trying to open it, and then one night he had succeeded. His later entries were unhinged. Underscore, it watches me from the dark. Underscore, I hear it breathing when I sleep. Underscore, it does not belong here. I cannot send it back. Underscore, the door was never meant to open. Underscore, the last entry was the worst. Underscore, if you are reading this, it is already too late. Underscore, my breath hitched. I snapped the journal shut, my pulse pounding in my ears. And then, a sound, a whisper, right behind me. I spun around. Nothing, but the air had changed. The darkness in the basement felt thicker, alive. I could hear it, feel it pressing in. Then, the light bulb flickered, the temperature plunged, and in the silence, from the farthest corner of the basement, a slow, deliberate footstep. I ran. I didn't even look back. I clutched the journal to my chest and sprinted up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind me. My entire body was shaking, my lungs burning. But before I could even catch my breath, the door shook. Something was on the other side, and it wanted out. I pressed my back against the basement door, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The wood thumped against me. Once, twice, then silence. I stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, my body rigid, every nerve in me screaming to run. But the door didn't move again. It was waiting. I clutched Albert Finch's journal to my chest, my fingers gripping the brittle leather so tightly my knuckles ached. My mind was racing, heart pounding against my ribs. I needed to leave, now. But where would I go? I had nowhere else, no one to stay with. My new job started in a few days. I had spent every last dollar moving here. Running wasn't an option. I forced myself to move, peeling away from the door as if afraid it might breathe against my skin. My legs felt weak, unsteady. I staggered into the kitchen and sat at the table, laying the journal down in front of me. I had to understand what Finch had done, because whatever it was, I was living with the consequences. The pages were filled with frantic scrawlings. Messy, erratic, desperate. I flipped back to the first entry, my eyes scanning the words. Underscore July 13th, 1936. The veil is thin here. I can feel it, even in daylight. The walls whisper if you listen closely enough. There is something waiting beyond the threshold. I must reach it. Underscore, I swallowed hard, a sick feeling twisting in my stomach. The next few pages detailed Finch's experiments. Rituals performed in the house, symbols drawn in salt and ash, offerings left at the threshold of the door, the basement door. I glanced toward it instinctively, half expecting it to move. It remained closed. For now. I turned another page. Underscore August 2nd, 1936. Tonight I heard it, a voice, faint like a breath against my ear. It knows me now. It waits in the dark, just beyond my reach. I must go further. Underscore August 12th, 1936. The house grows restless. My offerings are not enough. The door must be opened. Underscore, my throat felt dry. I knew what was coming. I knew what he had done. But reading it was worse. Underscore September 3rd, 1936. I opened it. Underscore, God help me. I opened it. Underscore. My hands trembled as I turned the page. Underscore, it does not speak. Not with words. It moves in the dark. It watches me. It knows what I fear. Underscore, I cannot sleep. I wake to the sound of breathing beside my bed. When I open my eyes, there is nothing there. Underscore, the mirror shows things that are not me. Underscore, it wants something, but I do not know what. Underscore, the entries grew more erratic after that. Scattered thoughts, Repeated phrases, asterisk, asterisk, the handwriting barely legible. Underscore, I was wrong. Underscore, underscore, I was wrong. Underscore, underscore, I was wrong. Underscore, then the final entry. Underscore, if you are reading this, it is already too late. Underscore, I slammed the book shut. The house felt too quiet. The air was thick, pressing in, listening. I needed to get out. Now. I grabbed my coat and bolted for the door, fumbling with the lock, yanking it open, and nearly ran straight into Mrs. Callahan. She looked startled, taking a small step back. "Oh," she said. "Dear, are you all right? You look pale." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My brain was still scrambling, trying to ground itself back in reality. I swallowed. I just needed some fresh air. Her brow furrowed. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a laugh, but it came out shaky. Mrs. Callahan pursed her lips, glancing toward the house. Has anything happened?" The way she asked it made my skin crawl, like she already knew the answer. I hesitated. "What do you mean?" Her face was unreadable for a long moment. Then, finally, she sighed. "You've been reading the journal, haven't you?" My blood turned to ice. "How do you know about that?" She exhaled slowly, looking down at the ground as if deciding how much to tell me. Then, after a long pause, she said, "Because you're not the first." I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Callahan looked toward the house, her expression clouded with something heavy. "I've lived in this neighborhood for a long time," she said. "Long enough to know that nobody stays in that house for long." I felt a chill run down my spine. "People come and go," she continued. "They move in, they seem fine at first, but then things start happening. Things they can't explain, and before long, they leave. Some in the middle of the night, some without even packing their things." One man ran out screaming. Another told me, before he left, that he woke up to something crawling onto his bed. The word sent a jolt of terror through me. Something crawling onto his bed. I thought about the way I had woken up last night. The feeling of weight on the mattress, the way the room had felt wrong. Did they ever find out what was haunting it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Callahan hesitated. "No," she said, "but they all found the journal, just like you." I clutched the book tighter. "None of them ever stayed after that," she added. "And I don't think you should either." I looked back at the house, at the windows, dark and empty, at the basement door, still and quiet, at the walls that whispered when no one was listening. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was time to go. That night, I made a decision. I would leave in the morning. I would pack whatever I could fit in my car, drive away, and never look back. I didn't care about the money. I didn't care about my new job. I just wanted out. I fell asleep with my suitcase half-packed. The journal lay open on my nightstand, its pages fluttering slightly in the breeze from the open window. At some point in the night, I woke up. The room was pitch dark. Something felt off. My skin prickled with unease. I turned over and froze. The journal. The pages were flipping rapidly, as if someone were turning them. I stared, my breath caught in my throat. Then the pages stopped, and there, scrawled in fresh wet ink, was a new line. A line that hadn't been there before. A message. A warning. Underscore, "It knows you're leaving." Underscore, asterisk, asterisk. My stomach dropped. Then, from the farthest corner of the room, a whisper, a breath, and the slow, deliberate sound of footsteps coming toward me. The footsteps were slow, deliberate. Each step felt like it was crawling through my veins, chilling me from the inside out. I lay frozen, eyes wide, unable to tear myself away from the corner of the room where the sound had begun. It was getting closer. I could hear the slight shuffle of fabric brushing against the floor, the faint creak of weight shifting. It wasn't the kind of sound I could imagine in the dark. It felt wrong, distorted. My heart was pounding so loudly in my chest, I was sure it could be heard from outside. But the sound of those footsteps drowned out everything else. Closer, I squeezed my eyes shut, desperately trying to tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. A cold breeze swept across my face, ruffling my hair, and the whisper grew louder, as though someone was standing right next to my ear, their breath hot and heavy against my skin. "You can't leave." The words weren't spoken. They were felt. They vibrated in my bones, sinking into my marrow. I sat up with a jolt, gasping for air, heart racing. The room was still dark. Too dark. But the presence, whatever it was, lingered. I blinked rapidly, trying to clear the fog that had overtaken my mind. And then I saw it, a shadow, standing in the corner of the room. It was tall, impossibly tall, and it shifted like liquid, undulating as if it wasn't quite solid. The outline of it stretched and contracted, and I could see something moving within the dark silhouette. Something that wasn't human. It was watching me. I felt my pulse quicken, but my body refused to move. I couldn't scream, couldn't run. Every instinct told me to stay still, as though any motion would provoke it. I was trapped. The shadow began to glide toward me, the air growing heavier with each passing second. Its shape was shifting, distorting further, like smoke or a trick of the light, but I could still feel it pressing against my skin, suffocating me. I reached for the journal, but my hands were shaking too violently to grip it. No, it couldn't touch me. I wouldn't let it, but the shadow continued to draw closer, and that voice, asterisk, asterisk, the whisper, asterisk, asterisk, came again. "You cannot escape." I grabbed my coat from the bed, feeling the fabric cold and slick against my fingers, and stood, backing away from the figure, heart thundering in my chest. I didn't know what I was doing. Whether I was making things worse by moving or staying still would have sealed my fate. But I had to try something. The door, asterisk, asterisk, the front door, asterisk, asterisk. It was right there. With one final glance at the shadow, I bolted. My feet barely made contact with the floor as I raced for the door. I didn't hear the footsteps anymore, but I could feel the presence, close behind, pushing against me like an invisible wave. The door was almost in reach. Just a little further, I grabbed the handle, twisted it with frantic desperation. Locked. I pulled harder, but it wouldn't budge. I slammed my shoulder into it once, twice, thrice, until, click, the door gave way, and I stumbled out into the hallway. It was still there. The air in the hallway was thick, suffocating, but it was nothing compared to what had been in that room. I could breathe again, but the taste of fear lingered in the back of my throat. I turned to run, but as I reached the staircase, I froze. The basement door. It was open. The shadows there seemed deeper than ever, and from the gap beneath the door, I could feel something pulling me toward it, like gravity, only heavier. I had to leave. I couldn't stay, but I couldn't ignore that pull. It was as if something deep within me was saying, "You have to go back." My body was screaming at me to turn and leave, but my feet were already moving toward the stairs. No. I stopped, frozen. The journal, still in my hand, was burning hot. It throbbed with an energy I could barely comprehend. I didn't know what Finch had unleashed, but I knew, deep in my bones, I was part of it now, and whether I liked it or not, I was going to have to face it. The stairwell creaked beneath my feet as I descended. Every step felt like an eternity, the darkness thickening around me, swallowing everything whole. I reached the bottom, my breath shallow, each inhale feeling like it might be my last. There was a dim light flickering from the far corner of the basement, but the shadows seemed to stretch forever, waiting, watching. I tried to steady myself, gripping the railing, but the sensation of being drawn deeper into the unknown was almost overwhelming. Every instinct screamed for me to turn back. But something inside me, something I couldn't explain, kept me moving forward. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was something worse. I reached the bottom of the stairs and stood there, frozen for a moment, trying to adjust to the oppressive silence. It was cold, too cold, and the faint smell of rot filled the air. A voice echoed in the back of my mind. You shouldn't be here, but it wasn't my voice. I glanced around the basement. The walls were cracked, the floor uneven. A thin layer of dust covered everything, but there were fresh footprints scattered across the floor. Footprints that were much larger than mine. My heart skipped. No, I wasn't alone. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I turned my head slowly, my body locked in place, unable to move any faster. At the far end of the basement, I saw someone, a figure, standing motionless in the shadows. I couldn't make out any details, only the outline, but it was there. It felt familiar, yet foreign. No, this couldn't be happening, asterisk, asterisk. I took a shaky step back, but my foot caught on something. I stumbled, and the noise echoed through the room like a gunshot, making the figure flinch. It moved in one smooth motion. It slid from the shadows into the dim light, revealing a face I knew. Finch. He looked different somehow. His eyes were wide, unblinking, as though they had never seen anything but the darkness. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and there were dark veins running along his neck, pulsing with a life of their own. His lips curled into a smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. I knew you'd come back. I couldn't speak. His smile widened, and he took a step toward me. You're part of it now, just like me. I took a step back, the words hitting me harder than I expected. Part of it? I could feel the bile rising in my throat. The basement felt alive, vibrating with energy, as though it was feeding off our exchange. It was the same overwhelming presence, the same dark, suffocating weight that had followed me since I first stepped into this house. You don't have to be afraid, Finch said, his voice low and hollow. It's already in you. It's inside. I shook my head, trying to back away, but my legs felt like lead. I couldn't escape the pull of the basement, the pull of him. You don't understand, he continued. You think I was cursed? No. This is an awakening. His eyes burned into mine, and I felt my heart beat in time with his words. You're already awake. My mind was spinning, unable to comprehend what was happening. How had Finch, my closest friend, become like this? What was he talking about? The journal burned hotter in my hand, and I suddenly realized it wasn't just a book. It was a key. To what? I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Everything in my body screamed for me to run, but my feet were glued to the floor. And then I saw it. Behind Finch, something shifted. The air around him distorted, rippling like heat rising off asphalt. But it wasn't heat. It was something darker. A figure. Tall. Shadowy. It stepped forward slowly, its form becoming clearer. The thing behind him, it wasn't human. Its body was a tangle of shadows and twisted limbs, each one contorting unnaturally. It was almost like it was made of the very darkness in the room, a mass of writhing, inhuman shapes that shifted and swirled. I wanted to scream, but the air was thick with a crushing silence. Finch didn't seem to notice. You'll understand soon enough, he said, his voice distant, as though it was coming from a dream. The figure stepped forward, and I could feel the floor tremble beneath me. My body screamed, but I couldn't move, couldn't tear my eyes away. It was right there now, standing behind Finch, its eyes glowing red, its jagged teeth exposed in a twisted grin. And then Finch, asterisk, asterisk, Finch, asterisk, asterisk, opened his mouth. But it wasn't him. It was the voice, the whisper, the thing that had been following me, pulling at my thoughts, invading my mind. You will be mine. The floor cracked beneath my feet, and everything shuddered. I couldn't breathe. The darkness closed in. I gasped, my breath ragged as I staggered back. my body finally reacting to the overwhelming fear that had paralyzed me moments before. I turned, desperate to escape, but the stairs felt miles away. The basement stretched endlessly in every direction, the walls pressing closer, suffocating me with every heartbeat. "You can't run." The voice was everywhere, but not from Finch. It came from all around me, crawling beneath my skin. It wasn't even a whisper. It was more like a presence, a sound that didn't need to be heard to be felt. It was deep, malevolent, and it held a finality that I couldn't shake. I glanced over my shoulder. Finch had stopped smiling. His face was empty now, hollowed out, vacant, as if he were no longer a person but a vessel for something far older and darker than any human could ever be. He didn't move, but the air around him crackled with a strange energy, like a storm gathering on the horizon. The figure behind him, it was closer now. Its twisted form loomed over Finch, its grotesque limbs stretching unnaturally. It was like nothing I'd ever seen, a thing from the depths, a shadow made flesh, and it had Finch's eyes, but no longer the warmth of the man I knew. Its movements were sharp and jerky, like a puppet controlled by an unseen hand. "You have to stop this, Finch." My voice cracked as I screamed, the words barely escaping through my fear. But it didn't matter. Finch's eyes, those cold, lifeless eyes, didn't even blink. He wasn't listening. The air around me seemed to warp, and I stumbled forward, feeling a shift beneath my feet. The basement wasn't just a room anymore. It was a living thing, breathing and pulsating like a heart. It was responding to me, to my fear. The shadows in the corners seemed to grow thicker, coiling and stretching, wrapping themselves around the edges of my vision. I didn't know how to fight it. How could I fight something like this? The figure inched closer, its grotesque limbs swaying with each movement. It reached out toward me, its fingers, too many fingers, curled like claws, and for a brief moment, the shadows around me seemed to pull back as if giving it space. I couldn't breathe. "You have no choice now." The voice rang louder, and I felt the ground tremble beneath me. Suddenly, I remembered the journal in my hand, the journal Finch had found before, the key. With trembling fingers, I opened it, the pages crisp and brittle beneath my touch. The words were still scrawled in the same jagged handwriting, but the ink had bled into the paper, as though the words themselves were alive, pulsating with an energy that made my skin crawl. "You must sever the connection." I read it aloud, barely believing what I was seeing. The shadows in the room flickered in response, and the figure, asterisk, asterisk, the thing asterisk, asterisk, stopped. It tilted its head as if studying me, its red eyes glowing brighter. It was waiting, watching. The words on the page were maddening, filled with rituals, symbols, and incantations that I didn't understand. But there was one line that stood out. "Only in blood can you sever the bond." My heart froze. Blood? The ground rumbled again, this time more violently, as if something beneath it was waking. The walls of the basement cracked, splintering along the edges, and the air grew thick, suffocating. The thing's form blurred, shifting rapidly in and out of focus, as if it were fighting to maintain its shape. I stumbled backward, nearly falling, but somehow I managed to keep myself upright. My hand was still clutching the journal. "You don't have to do this." Finch's voice was hollow, distant. He was still standing there, but his body was changing. His skin was rippling, as though something inside him was trying to break free. I could feel the pull, the same pull that had haunted me since the moment I stepped into this house. The darkness wasn't just in the house anymore. It was inside me. I could feel it swirling in my veins, in my very soul, a cold and sinister presence that wanted to consume me whole. I glanced at the journal again, my eyes racing over the pages. The incantation was clear now. The ritual, though ancient and disturbing, was the only option left. "Finch, please," I screamed, my voice breaking. But he didn't react. He didn't move. The thing behind him was growing, its shadow expanding like a living entity, as if it were feeding off the fear in the room. "I can't stop it," I whispered, the words leaving my mouth like a prayer. But the answer came in the form of a single, violent tremor that rattled the entire house. Suddenly, I understood. There was no stopping it. Not anymore. I had to make a choice, and I had only one chance. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The basement was shaking, the walls closing in. The shadows were alive, reaching for me. And then the thing, the thing that had taken Finch, moved. It lunged toward me. The air went still for a moment. Too still, like the calm before a storm. I froze, my heart thundering in my chest. The thing was almost upon me, its twisted limbs stretching out like a spider preparing to strike. Its eyes, those crimson, unnatural eyes, were locked on mine, its presence suffocating. The shadows around it writhed, eager to swallow me whole. In that moment, I realized something crucial. I wasn't just being chased by this thing. It was connected to me, connected to this house, to Finch, to everything that had happened since I stepped through that door. It wasn't merely a creature of darkness. It was a manifestation, a thing born from the very fear and despair that clung to this place like a disease. The journal in my hand trembled as I gripped it tighter, the weight of its knowledge sinking in. The blood, the ritual. It was the only way. But could I really do it? Could I sacrifice everything, my sanity, my very soul, to stop this nightmare? Run. The word was barely a whisper, but I heard it clear as day. It was Finch's voice, but it wasn't his. It was colder now, more distant, like it had been warped by something far darker than he could have ever known. I glanced at him. His body was changing, contorting. His skin was rippling, as if something inside was trying to break free, trying to crawl out of him. The thing was still coming, its limbs moving with unnatural speed. It stretched and twisted, its body disjointed, yet its movement was fluid, like a nightmare given form. My mind screamed at me to run, to flee this house, to never look back. But my feet were frozen to the ground. I couldn't outrun it. I couldn't escape it. "Finch," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "What have you done?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward, his eyes still blank, his body now completely engulfed in shadow. There was nothing left of the man I once knew. Just an empty vessel, a puppet. "You can't fight it," the voice from the thing rumbled, shaking the air. "You are part of it now. You always have been." My breath hitched. The words were true. The fear, the darkness. It had always been inside me, festering, waiting for this moment. No, I shook my head, as if denying it would make it untrue. But the words still echoed in my mind, like an unshakable truth. This was my fate. This was my connection to the house, to Finch, to the nightmare unfolding around me. But I couldn't just give in. I couldn't let it win. With a desperate resolve, I tore my gaze away from Finch and focused on the journal once more. The words blurred before my eyes, but I could see the key: blood. The ritual, the only way to break the bond. But how? I swallowed hard, tasting the metallic tang of fear in the back of my throat. The blood, the sacrifice, the ritual had to be completed. But it demanded more than I had anticipated. The shadows were closing in, filling the basement, pressing in from all sides. I could feel them crawling beneath my skin, dragging me toward the center of the room where the darkness was thickest. The air was growing colder. My breath was shallow. And then I felt it. The presence behind me, creeping closer, its fingertips grazing the nape of my neck, sending an icy shiver down my spine. "Finish it," the voice whispered in my ear. I could feel the weight of it, this ancient evil, bearing down on me, waiting for me to make the final choice. My pulse quickened as the journal slipped from my trembling hands, falling to the floor with a thud. I had to act. I had no choice. The air around me was thick with whispers, with promises of death, of something worse. And that's when it hit me. If I didn't finish the ritual, If I didn't sever the bond, there would be no escape. The thing, the house, the darkness, they would consume everything. It was now or never. I reached for the sharp edge of the journal. With trembling hands, I pressed it to my palm, the blade cutting deep into my skin. I gasped as the blood began to drip, slow at first, then faster, the red pooling beneath my hand. "Stop!" It was Finch's voice again, though distant and strained. It wasn't the man I had known, but the shell of him, corrupted by something that wasn't human anymore. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't let the darkness win. The blood soaked into the floor, spreading like a river, and the house seemed to tremble in response. The walls groaned, and for a fleeting moment, the shadows seemed to pause, as if waiting for something. Then, I spoke the words from the journal, barely able to breathe as I recited the incantation. The language was ancient, twisted, but it tumbled from my lips as if it had always been there, buried deep within me. The ground beneath me rumbled, and the room spun, the world blurring around me as I struggled to hold on. The thing screamed, a sound so guttural and filled with rage, I thought my ears would bleed. The shadows recoiled, twisting and snapping like a broken mirror, and I could feel them pulling back, fighting to stay connected to me. "No!" The voice was Finch's, but it was fading into nothing. I could hear him, his pain, his regret, but it was too late. The ritual was complete. The world was still spinning, and my head felt like it was about to explode. I could barely stand, my legs trembling beneath me as if they no longer knew how to hold my weight. The shadows, their presence, was slowly receding, but it didn't feel like a victory. I had done it. I had broken the bond. The thing was gone, but the house was still there. Finch was still there, and I could still feel his presence, his soul, trapped somewhere in the dark corners of this place. But what now? The room around me was eerily quiet. No more whispers. No more shuffling footsteps. The oppressive weight of the house seemed to lift, but only a little, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something, or someone. I wiped the sweat from my brow, blinking hard to clear the fog in my mind. It had been so close. So damn close. And then I heard it, the sound that had been absent since the beginning of this nightmare. A soft thud, then another, like footsteps, slow, deliberate. But they were coming from somewhere else, somewhere I had never ventured before. I turned, my heart in my throat. The basement door stood ajar. No, I could still feel the weight of that place, its memories lingering in the air. It wasn't over, it couldn't be, but something was pulling me toward it. Something in the back of my mind told me to go, to finish whatever had started. Maybe I had to, maybe it was the only way to truly free myself from this place. Or maybe, just maybe, there was still something else here, something left behind that hadn't been eradicated. Finch. His name echoed in my mind, and I felt a deep, aching emptiness in my chest. What had happened to him? Had he been consumed by whatever had taken hold of this house? Or was he still fighting? Still trapped in that endless darkness? I didn't know. And frankly, I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. But I had no choice. I stepped forward, my body fighting every instinct to turn around and flee. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading into the bowels of the house. The very heart of it, the place where all the nightmares had begun. I hesitated at the top of the stairs. My breath was shallow, each inhale filled with the cold, stale air of the house. The silence was deafening, and the darkness at the bottom of the stairs. It felt alive, like it was waiting for me. And then I heard it again, the faintest sound, a whisper. "Help me." It was Finch. His voice, barely a whisper. It was him, but not. The words were strained, like he was trying to push through a wall of darkness to reach me. I didn't know what to do. Every part of me wanted to run, but something else, something far deeper, told me that I couldn't leave. Not yet. Not until I knew the truth. I stepped down the first stair, then another, The house felt different now. Quieter, almost empty, like it was waiting for me to uncover something hidden in the depths of its rotting walls. The further I went, the colder it got. The air was thick with dust and the scent of decay, like the house had been abandoned for years. But I knew it hadn't. And then I reached the bottom. The basement was vast, larger than I had imagined. The walls were lined with old crates, broken furniture, and forgotten relics of the past. But it wasn't the contents that caught my attention. It was the thing in the center of the room, the thing that I had only seen in glimpses before. A large, cracked mirror, half shrouded in shadows. The surface of it gleamed with a sickly light, distorting everything it reflected. Finch. I called out his name, but my voice faltered, swallowed by the thick silence. The mirror remained still, the reflection warping in a way that didn't feel right. And then I saw it, a figure, pale, gaunt, with eyes that burned like fire, staring back at me. It was Finch, but not Finch. His body was twisted, misshapen, like it had been remade in the image of the thing that had haunted him. "Help me," he whispered again. But this time, his voice was different. It was twisted, deep, warped by something unnatural. "You can't help him," the voice said, its tone low and gravelly, like the earth itself was speaking. I froze, my blood running cold. The thing in the mirror, it wasn't Finch. It was something else, something that had taken him. "You have to finish what you started," the voice continued, its words slithering into my mind. "The curse can only be broken by blood. Blood, the ritual, it wasn't over." But I didn't understand. Why? Why did it have to end this way? Why did it have to be me? "There's no escaping it," the voice hissed louder now. "You are part of this, just as much as Finch was." A chill ran down my spine, and I realized for the first time that I wasn't just trapped in this house. I was bound to it. The mirror gleamed with an unnatural intensity as I stood frozen in place. The figure of Finch, or what used to be Finch, was still staring back at me. His eyes, hollow and glowing with a fire that wasn't human, seemed to pierce through the glass, digging deep into my soul. I could feel the pull, the urge to step closer, but my body wouldn't obey. The fear was too much, and yet it wasn't just fear. It was something darker, something ancient, like I was standing at the precipice of something far beyond my understanding. The air around me seemed to thicken, the temperature dropping further, until my breath came out in visible clouds. It felt as though the house was closing in on me, tightening its grip. The silence, too, had changed now. It was oppressive, pressing in from all sides, suffocating me. "You can't help him." The voice was louder now, its words slithering like poison, filling my mind with dread. The presence in the room seemed to grow stronger, more powerful with every passing second. I took a step back, and the floor creaked beneath my feet. It was as though the house itself was reacting to my fear, urging me to turn and run, to escape the truth that was quickly unraveling before me. But it was too late. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. I wasn't going to escape. This wasn't just a haunting. It was a curse, a cycle that had bound me to this place, just as it had bound Finch before me. I wasn't a mere observer. I was a participant in something ancient, something horrific that had long been set in motion. My connection to this house, to Finch, to whatever had claimed us both, ran deeper than I could have ever imagined. The mirror seemed to warp again, and I saw it, a flash of movement. Not Finch, but something else. The figure was taller now, towering over the broken remnants of Finch's form. It was cloaked in shadows, its face hidden in the folds of blackness, but I could feel its eyes, cold, calculating. It was watching me. "Finish what was started." The words echoed in my head, louder now, more demanding. The voice was no longer a whisper. It was a command, and the command was clear. I had to give in, but I didn't understand. What did it mean to finish what had been started? How was I supposed to break the cycle when it felt like it was already too late? I looked around the room. my mind scrambling for some sort of answer, some clue that would explain it all. The crates and old furniture were nothing but remnants of a forgotten past. But as I turned my gaze back to the mirror, I noticed something different. A piece of paper, yellowed with age, resting against the base of the glass. I bent down, my hands trembling as I picked it up. It was a letter, scrawled in frantic handwriting. The words were smeared in places, as though they had been written in a hurry, but I could still make out the most important part. The curse can only be broken with the blood of the one who started it. You must seal it before it claims you too. I felt my stomach churn. The letter was old, but it had been written by someone who knew exactly what was happening. The blood of the one who started it. Asterisk, asterisk me, asterisk, asterisk. I had to stop this. I had to end it. But how? The shadows in the mirror grew darker, more menacing, and the temperature in the room dropped even further. I could feel the cold sinking into my bones, and a terrible pressure began to build in my chest, as if something was pushing down on me from all sides. The thing in the mirror, it was reaching for me. You belong to me now. The voice was a low growl now, echoing through the room, reverberating in my very soul. The shadowy figure reached toward me, its hand outstretched. It was pulling me into the mirror, into the darkness that awaited within. I stumbled backward, my heart racing. This was it. This was the end. I had no choice but to confront the thing in the mirror. I had to face whatever it was and break the cycle, or else it would consume me, just like it had consumed Finch. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. The blood was the key. There was only one way out. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the decision settle on me. The fear was overwhelming, but there was no other choice. I had to do it. I had to break the curse, once and for all. Without thinking, I reached up and pressed my hand against the mirror. The coldness of it burned my skin, but I didn't pull away. Instead, I let my hand linger there, focusing on the shadowy figure behind the glass, willing myself to understand, to break free. For a long moment, nothing happened, and then the mirror cracked. The sound was deafening, a sharp, jagged noise that echoed through the house like a death knell. The figure in the mirror let out a low, guttural scream, a sound of pure rage that sent chills down my spine. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling, as the mirror shattered into 1,000 pieces, each shard reflecting the dark, twisted image of the thing that had been haunting me. And then silence. The house was still. The weight lifted. For the first time in what felt like forever, the oppressive darkness was gone. But I wasn't free. I could still feel it. Asterisk, asterisk, its presence, asterisk, asterisk, lingering, just beyond the edges of my perception. It was as though the house itself was watching me, waiting for me to make the next move. But I had no answers. I had no more strength to fight. I collapsed to my knees, my body trembling with exhaustion. I had done it. I had broken the curse. But I knew deep down that whatever had haunted this place, whatever had consumed Finch, was still out there, still waiting. And as I looked around the broken remnants of the basement, I realized that the house was no longer just a house. It was a prison that I couldn't escape. Not ever.